Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming inside on this gorgeous day for a discussion of the Path to Progress, New Jersey Economic and Fiscal Policy Workgroup publication that Senator Sweeney, Senator Steve Sweeney and Senator Steve Oroho and others have been going around the state talking to people about the ideas in this report and trying to explain them and get comments from people in the public and questions, and with a goal toward making the state fiscal situation better. They're going to talk, give a presentation, and then we'll have time for some questions from anyone who wants to ask questions. We are live streaming this on the web, so if you miss it, I guess you can, or if you know people who missed this discussion, you can see it again on the Eagleton website later on. So our guests here are Senator Steve Sweeney, who has been in the state Senate since 2002. He is the state Senate president, which he has been since 2010, making him the second longest serving state Senate president in New Jersey's history. And Senator Steve Oroho represents Sussex County, all of Sussex County, and part of Warren and Morris County. He's been in the state Senate since 2008, and he is the Republican budget officer in the Senate. And Marc Pfeiffer has a long-time background in state government and finance particularly, and is a consultant, I guess, at the Bloustein School on policy and finance issues.
Close enough.
Close enough, okay. So I'm going to ask each of them to speak. I'll start with Senator Sweeney, and thank you again for coming.
Thanks for having us, John. And this all started, seems like forever ago. I went to Senator Steve Oroho and Paul Sarlo and said, we want to convene a panel. We didn't take any resolution or pass any official government act. We just went to people and said, we need to get in a room and try to figure out the state's finances. We're in trouble. And more trouble than anybody really possibly imagines right now. So we basically assembled, I don't want to give Mark a big head, but the who's who of government experts in the state of New Jersey, tax experts, economists, to really look at what was wrong with New Jersey. And that panel came up with 200 recommendations. We broke it down into 5 working groups, down to 58 recommendations, then down to 32. And these are the 32 recommendations that the panel brought forward. And look, there's some things I don't agree with. I'm sure Steve doesn't agree with. But we made a commitment to the people that put a ton of time in, that we wouldn't just do a report and let it sit on the shelf. Because, Mark, you've been involved in how many of these?
8.
Okay. That gives you the confidence on how much New Jersey really is willing to deal with the financial crisis that we have right now. But when we looked at the budget, what we realized is that this year, every penny of growth that New Jersey is going to have is going to go into the pension fund and the health care funds, which means there is no money to fund anything unless we raise taxes. And we're in a situation where the tax problem in New Jersey, we have the 5th highest tax burden. The SALT, the state and local tax issue that President Trump gave us. Trump makes Bush look good, just so you know. Really, it's not hurting just the wealthy, it's hurting the middle class. I can't tell you how many people I've spoken to that have said they've actually paid more taxes now in New Jersey than last year, and there's nothing different in their lives. It's just they live in New Jersey, and that's problematic. New Jersey's expensive, and we want to fix it. I'll give everybody a chance to talk, and then we'll get into the meat of the issue. But it's time to fix New Jersey and understand something. A lot of these recommendations have been around for a long time. These are the hardest things the government is ever going to do, and that's why they haven't been done yet. But we're at Rutgers University right now. Not Rutgers, but New Jersey's public schools are the second most expensive in the nation because we don't invest here. We're either 48th or 49th in investment in our public schools. So the states surrounding New Jersey have special out-of-state tuition rates to lure New Jersey residents to their state. And it'll be cheaper to go to state schools out of state than in state. And I got to tell you, with the investment that we've made from pre-K to 12, we don't want to lose that investment. The young people in this room are the future of this state. And the more they leave, the more it hurts the economy of the state and takes away the investment that we've made. So I want to invest in higher education. I want to invest in pre-K. There's a lot of things I want to invest in. I don't have the ability to do that, and just raising a tax here or there will not fix it. At the end of 4 years, we're going to be at a $4 billion deficit if we don't address this now. But with that, Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Senate President. And thank you. Good to be here with John and Mark and the Senate President. When I started in the Senate in 2008, my background, I am a CPA, a certified public accountant. I don't practice as one. I do practice as a certified financial planner. I was in corporate finance my whole career. If you ever said I would be in, the state legislature, 20 years ago, I said, actually, it's getting pretty close now. No. 30 years ago, I would have said, you're crazy. I would never expected it. But I served on a local Franklin Borough Council, then on the Sussex County Freeholder Board, and then into the state Senate. And when I got into the state Senate, I met Senator Steve Sweeney, who's had the courage to listen. We don't always agree on everything, but he's had the courage to take on the tough issues. One of the first things we talked about was having some sort of, when I was at W.R. Grace, Ronald Reagan, President Reagan asked J. Peter Grace, a Republican, asked a conservative Democrat to come up with the Grace Commission and help make the U.S. government more efficient. So he came up with a whole bunch of recommendations, and Senator Sweeney and I spoke, and we said we should do something here as well. And that was one of the start of what had become the Red Tape Review Commission when we did a bipartisan, bicameral under Governor Christie when he put it in place, and it was pretty successful. One of the other things we also talked about is the total. We would always talk about the total cost of government. And when I got in the Senate, I always tried to add it up, and you couldn't come up with anything. Well, now we do know. It's about $115 billion is the total cost. You add all the government-related stuff together, about $115 billion. And you look at our gross domestic product in New Jersey, and it's 500, a little north of 500 billion. So almost 21% is quote-unquote overhead type of stuff. So it's a very heavy overhead burden. So the first we started talking about is how do we help make New Jersey's government costs more efficient. And as I looked at all the years, you can go right down the line. The one thing that New Jersey did very well on a bipartisan basis was screw it up. You could look at Republican, you could look at Democrat, you could right down the middle. It's almost 50-50. And as to and unfortunately, one of the key things down in the legislature is you can make promises. The one thing that's hard, promises are easy. Payments are difficult. And as what happens all the time is you heard of the proverbial can kicked down the road. That happens all the time. And the hole just gets worse and worse. So we'll talk a little bit more about it. But so when Senator Sweeney had asked myself, Senator Sarlo, and Senator Greenwald to put together the chair of this committee, we were very fortunate that, as Senator Sweeney said, we had the experts already there. The one thing that had been missing in a lot of those 8 reports that Marc Pfeiffer had talked about was the courage to actually do something, get something done. And I've worked with Senator Sweeney. He's been all over the state trying to tell you and have an honest discussion about what it is that needs to be fixed in New Jersey. So it's my honor to be here with my colleagues right here.
Okay, so I guess I'm up. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marc Pfeiffer. I am actually a senior policy fellow over at the Bloustein School, but that's on top of about, probably 38 years of working for New Jersey state and local government. I spent 10 years as a municipal administrator and then 26 years for the state agency that oversees all of our local governments, counties, and authorities, and being in senior management there for a while. I, however, was only one of 5 of the so-called of our expert panel from the Bloustein School, Dr. Ray Caprio, Dr. Mike Lahr, let's see, Dr. Henry Coleman, who many of you in the audience know, as well as Rich Keevy, who's a former state director of Office of Management and Budget and also spent some time doing that type of work with the federal government, and he's also a senior policy fellow. But we weren't the only experts. We had folks from the world of education. We had the head of the state CPA Society. We had some economists. And there was about 12 or 14 of us that joined the legislature and trying to work our way through and get our arms around what the problems the state has, and then figure out what we're going to do, what we can do about it. My focus was particularly in the world of local government and how that interfaces with state government. And I'll just give you a couple of the quick observations, and we've alluded to it already, but many of the things we deal with in New Jersey have changed over time. We are doing many things the same way that we've done them without significant change for 40, 50, 60 years when the problems and the environments of those situations have changed. And we need some type of process to go back and be able to look at those things to say, well, should we still be doing something in 2020 that we were doing in 1968? Is the problem different? So we kind of need a way to deal with those things. We also realized, as we alluded to, is that these things are not easy to solve. If they were, we wouldn't have a new commission or a new effort from every sitting governor. Every governor that comes in wants to do something about this, and there's some type of initiative to deal with that. I think I probably misstated 8. It was probably 4 or 5, actually. But we need to do something, and the fact that we haven't solved these problems just goes to how challenging they are, and we have to figure that out. When we talk about local government and public schools, we also have to realize that with 565 municipalities, 590 plus school districts, depending on how you count them, and some 300 local authorities, plus or minus, we have a lot of different use cases. And the challenge of coming up with state legislation that works with all of those different circumstances is infinitely harder to do, which again makes this problem hard. I think the result of what we did is a framework, and we like calling it a framework because it's the answers that we come up with in the end don't have to be precisely what we recommended. We're looking to say, let's get together, let's the administration get together, the legislature to get together, talk to the interest groups at stake, but we need to start moving this forward because we've got to start to bend those cost curves. Otherwise, we're going to be pouring all of our money into state pensions and health benefit costs and not doing anything for pre-K, for offsetting school costs in our urban areas, the way at the level that we need, dealing with mass transit, dealing with the environment. We're not going to have the resources to plug into those areas because everything we've got is going to be going into these other costs, and we need to deal with that.
Okay.
With that.
Give you a little history, basically how we got to this problem, because people really don't like to talk about this. And this is not fighting with public sector workers. This is just actual history in New Jersey. In 1997, Governor Christie Todd Whitman bonded $2.8 billion to make a pension payment. The money was there, but she wanted to cut taxes by 30%. That was a campaign promise. So she took the money for the pension payment and cut taxes. Well, the $2.8 billion created, and the assumption rate, if anybody knows what an assumption rate is what you assume your investments are going to make on your pension. The assumption rate was 8 3/4. Now, anybody who understands investments, that's insane, but that's what it was, because they wanted to create a scenario that everything was fine. So public sector unions, teachers, and the CWA supported, not the current leaders, but back then supported this bonding. With that, the pensions were over 100% funded. So by law, if your pensions are over 100% funded, you make improvements. Now realize, it wasn't really overfunded, it was overfunded on paper. So first thing they did is they reduced their contribution by 40%. They went from 5.5% to 3.5%. Now, it wasn't real, but they took 40% of the money out of the pension system. That's bad. Then they decided to lower the retirement age by 5 years because they were still overfunded. So lowering the retirement age by 5 years with no funding, is anything in this world free? You guys going to school here for free? Nothing in life, I'm going to give you the most valuable lesson you'll ever have in life. Nothing is free, okay? Something always has a cost to it. So they lowered the retirement age by 5 years. And then in 2001, this was the end-all to be-all that actually really was the thing that was the straw that broke the camel's back. The legislature, Republican and Democrat, voted to give 800,000 people a 9% raise without one penny to go towards it. Why are we broke? Because we screwed it up. But guess what? They were part of it. The other side of it, too, is governments didn't make their payments. So workers have a right to be mad because government wasn't making their payments. But at the end of the day, here's where we're at. The pension payment, if no one had screwed around with it, should have been less than $1 billion to make the full pension payment. This year, we're going to get up to $3.7 billion, okay? There's a couple $1 billion if we had a magic wand and went back in time and changed this, we wouldn't have to do any of this. But again, pensions take a long time for the impacts to hit, and that's what happened here. It just took time. But when we try to tell people in 2005 and 6, hey, your pension's in trouble, mind your own business. Well, I'm a union guy. That's what I do for a living. I care about this. I said that your pension's going to go broke. Mind your own business. All we need to do is raise the sales tax. We raised the sales tax a half a penny, and we fixed the pension system. So back in 2006, I didn't vote for it because I represent the poorest legislative district. If you want to look it up, my district's the poorest district in the state of New Jersey. It's the 3rd legislative district. We have rural poverty. And I can tell you, rural poverty is bad, but rural poverty is even worse because there's no transportation. There's no way to get there to get anything done. So, we got to a point where I just gave you the history. Oh, and that bond that Whitman passed was backloaded. It was at non-recallable, which means you couldn't reinvest it, 7.5%. So the Whitman bond deal cost the taxpayers by 2027, it's 2019, will be almost $11 billion. That was a bad deal all the way around. But I can't change what happened in the past. And we have an obligation to make sure that people that are working get the pension they were promised. But just like they did just recently in Pennsylvania, they agreed to change the pension system. And guess what? There was no fight. There was no argument. No one was mad. The headlines in the newspapers, because I live in the Philadelphia media market, I'm like, there had to be a big fight here. Because I'm used to the fights. And they said, no, we knew we had to do something. We did it, took it off the table. That was great. Here's the other problem we have. Healthcare. I want to congratulate and recognize the CWA just did some things to reduce their healthcare costs, which is great. They took their plans down to a cost of about $27,000. But on the education side, the state education health benefit plan, a family plan there, one teacher's $38,000. That's not sustainable. So you're hearing a lot of teachers say, or you're hearing a lot of public employees say, we need relief from Chapter 78 because too much money is coming out of our pocket to pay for our health insurance. No, we need to change the health care plan to what President Obama coined a gold plan, which is what a Fortune 500 company provides. At J&J, really the big corporations provide gold-level health benefits. And if you went to that, a teacher would probably be paying $3,500 less out of pocket because you would have excellent health care and you'd pay less. One of the recommendations on health care, which scared everyone, and we stopped it because we don't want to scare people into retirement, was what we found out is New Jersey's the only state in the country that when you retire, you pay less for your health insurance. Every other state in the country, if you're paying 20%, that's what you pay in retirement. Here in New Jersey, you pay 9, is it, Steve?
Something like that, yeah.
Something like 9, so less than half. And we don't want to scare people, so we said, we'll take that recommendation off the table. The time to fight, the fight has to end, and the conversation has to go forward because I'm telling you, $1.2 billion in economic growth each year. This year, every penny of it goes to the pension healthcare plan. I want to invest in pre-K. I'm a big believer in pre-K, but I want to go beyond where we're at. I want to go to pre-K to birth. A human brain develops, 85% of your brain develops from birth to 5 years old. So the more you can get someone earlier, and I witnessed this firsthand. I have a daughter who was a preemie, and you have early intervention. If you're a preemie, my daughter was 2 pounds, and my daughter has Downs. She was being taught like 4 days after she got out of the hospital, and guess what? She was learning. And kids that go to pre-K are better students for the most part. They're better adjusted. They seem like they have less conflict. They do better in school. So, investing where we need to invest makes our state even a better state. And, but all you're going to hear from the other side is, well, raise the millionaire's tax. Okay, that's $450 million. What next? What next? There's nothing back. You know what I mean? It's, well, we'll raise the sales tax. Okay. Those two account for $1 billion. What about the other $3 billion we're short? What other tax do we raise on people? What don't we invest in? That's the problem we're looking at, and we need to fix it. And again, I've raised taxes. I'm not afraid to raise taxes if it fixes the problem. But if it's not going to fix the problem, then there's no solution. And I can tell you from going around, I get people come up to me in the morning. I go to the gym. I'm in the gym at 4:30 in the morning. And because, when you're in the legislature, all the stuff we do, you don't sleep well. So I have people come up to me all the time and tell me, as soon as my kids get out of high school, I'm out of here. Everyone's heard that. Probably heard your parents say that. Everyone's heard that. We don't want people to leave. We want people to stay. So there's some of the real big areas we're concentrating on. I'm going to leave some meat for these guys. Good.
You're on a roll. You're doing well. Now, something that Senator Sweeney had talked about, I've always focused on the issue of capital and what kind of happens when capital flows, that, it kind of goes with my background. And when you look at, in New Jersey, prior to 2004, because this goes back a while, as Senator Sweeney says, sometimes it takes a while for the decisions to really catch up to what's been happening. But prior to 2004, Chief Financial Officer magazine said that New Jersey wasn't in the bottom of any business classification. It was a great place to have a business. In 2004, the CFO magazine came out and said New Jersey crashed into the bottom. So when you take a look at, and 4 out of the 5 categories we had, we went there and we stayed there. And probably people have heard of the issue of the price elasticity to demand. And I mentioned that on the Senate floor, and people looked at me and go, what the hell is this guy talking about? But what it is simply is this. When you raise your prices too high, everybody thinks you raise your prices, you're going to make more money. Well, there's a point in time when you raise your prices, customers, retailers know this very well. Customers stop coming in the door. So actually your revenue goes down. And when you take a look at from 2004 to 2016, the latest data available, New Jersey's actually lost $25 billion of taxable income cumulatively. We haven't had 1 year where more taxable income has come into the state than has left the state. And unfortunately, it's been accelerating. And a couple of things just to say is, we're talking a lot about, obviously the pensions and the health care and whatnot. But one of the key things is that, we need time and discipline to get out of the hole that we're in. We're not actually saying, as Senator Sweeney said, taking anything away from anybody who's already earned something already. Where the recommendation is on the pension side is to create a hybrid plan. And a lot of private, companies in the private sector have done this. Call them a cash balance plan, call them a hybrid plan. And what it is you'll have a base, it's almost like a Social Security type thing, a base of say $40,000, the first $40,000 of your salary will be in a defined benefit plan. And then anything above that people will be in a defined contribution plan, like a 401k, a 403b, a 457. And one of the reasons why companies have done that too is because a lot of the laws have changed where I see a lot of, younger generation, millennials here and whatnot. One of the key difference between a defined benefit plan and defined contribution plan, well, first of all, the employer's got to make the contribution. And that's one of the worst things of why, and that's been the government's problem. They haven't made their contributions, both Republicans and Democrats. However, on a defined contribution plan, you got to make those payments. Now, if let's say somebody, says, I want to go into a different career. In a defined benefit plan, you don't get to take that with you. You get your contributions back in a small interest rate, but you don't get to take those assets with you. In a defined contribution plan or 401k, you take them with you, they're portable. So you can go from one job to the next, and you don't get handcuffed into any one particular, profession. The other thing, the key thing is on the healthcare side, under the Affordable Care Act, that's law. And and I don't see them, obviously it hasn't been changed yet. There's something in there called the Cadillac tax. And the reason why that's important is this: it's law. If you have an actuarial value of your health care plans above 80%, New Jersey's actuarial value is 97%, the highest in the country. The difference between that 80 and whatever it is, you pay 40% more in taxes. That's $600 million. So not only will the cost curve be bending downwards, it'll be going up. So that's something we absolutely have to deal with. And I think it's been delayed a few times. I think it's up in 2022. But that's right around the corner. So anyway, so if we don't start having these discussions, those are two of the biggest things we talk about. We also talk about regionalization. I'm sure we'll get into it. But, and we have the expert on consolidations, regionalizations, and
Okay, so let me fill in a couple blanks so far. Some of the specific recommendations we made, for example, on the pension program. As Senator Oroho said, it's a $40,000 minimum, $40,000 package for any employee. The first $40,000 would go into a defined benefit, and anything on top of that would go into some form of cash balance plan. But the catch is that will only apply to employees who have less than 5 years of service or come new into the system. Everybody who's in one of the current state pension systems with at least 5 years of service from the time this happens, right, is protected under their current plan. So no employee with experience is going to be affected by that. Only new people and people with less than 5 will be in the new plan. One of the things that does is that when we had some actuaries look at the plans and different options, if we said, okay, if we cut everybody off now and say, okay, everybody that's in the system now is clean and everybody else going forward is in a 401k type of plan, that didn't help us all that much. It saves some money, but this plan is better because we're now providing our lower income employees a guaranteed return on their pension benefit, that they're going to have something there that they can build on top of. And that was important to us. We have to remember, and I think both senators have mentioned it, that public employment is a challenging environment. We have people who make personal sacrifices and commit to work for the public on behalf of everybody else, not because they're getting stock benefits, not because they're getting an annual bonus based on the performance of the business, but because they believe in doing it. And they're helping everybody else. And that's a real important element. And any of the policies we adopt have to take that in as part of that equation. And that becomes an important issue. On the health benefit side, we're looking at moving employees from that Platinum Plus plan. We're actually, under Obamacare, the way those medals and the percentages work is that the plan on an actuarial basis, Platinum says that the plan and the contributions made by employees and employers cover 90% of the costs, right? We've been at historically around 97%. And that's far in excess of what anybody in the private sector gets, which creates another inequity between where public employees are and the people who are paying the bills, right? So we propose taking that down to gold, which is 80% of that, the premiums and contributions of employers and employees are paying 80% of the cost. And that also allows different plans to be offered so that employees, given their specific circumstances, can buy a plan that will cover 80% of the cost, but they get different benefit levels with that, with different premiums, which, again, since employees are now sharing a cost of the premium, they get to make smarter choices, and everybody can save money in the long run. So those are two of the big recommendations on what we call the Penn Bend side of things. From the local government standpoint in public schools, there's a couple key issues there. One of the things that caught a lot of people's attention is the recommendation that we start moving our non-K through 12 districts into K-12 systems. So where you have municipalities that have their own K-8 or a K-6 or K-4, or they send they have a middle school and then they send to high schools, one of the challenges there is that a lot of those districts do not coordinate their curriculum with the high school district. So when students show up from 8th grade going into 9th grade, they're at different levels, and it creates more challenges for that high school to bring everybody up to that same level so they're all working at the same things and the curriculum gets coordinated. So in the ed world, that's called articulation. So one of the things we want to see is come up with a way where we can ensure that those districts are articulated together, right? And the students have a smooth runway into high school, and that everybody's coming in with the same level of stuff. That's an important thing. Now, will there be cost savings? Yes. All right? You're going to have some districts go away, but that's just going to be on the that'll be administrative savings, because those schools that are there will still stay there. The principal may report to a new superintendent and a new board of education, but there will still be representation from the municipalities who are members, and you're going to eliminate a level of overhead and bureaucracy there. And we think that's a win-win, because we get improved education, which is the keystone of it, and then the savings we get come after that. That's a big deal. We're also looking at, and there's some recent press on this, is that the notion of the state absorbing the cost of extraordinary special education services. These higher level for the profoundly disabled children that are very expensive. And the fact that you have one of those kids in a district can really sock it to the taxpayers of those districts isn't terribly fair to everybody else. So when you have these profoundly disabled children, when they're classified like that, we want to move those costs to state government, and the state will pay those costs. So it's not at the local level. That's a big deal. Similarly, along the special ed side, one of the things that happens is that when parents and the districts get together to come up with the IEPs for those students, you can get involved in a lot of debate and what service level is appropriate. And you get the parents and district fighting. The way things work is those go to the Office of Administrative Law, where an administrative law judge has to make a decision. In those cases today, those can be drawn-out affairs that can go 6, 12, or 18 months. What we're recommending is that the Office of Administrative Law assign specific judges who have the specific purpose of hearing those cases and have the incentives to expedite them and move them along and get those decisions made quickly and intelligently, so the parents know where they stand, so better decisions can be made. In the local government world, one of the areas that we want to focus on is shared services. And we think there's opportunities there to set minimum levels of services that are efficient and effective, so some municipalities aren't spending a lot of money for a relatively small level of service. So the idea of finding a minimum scale of service becomes an idea that we think has merit. So we want to do some studies that will get us to the point where, say, let's look at 911 emergency call taking and dispatch. What's the right size, the minimum size that a municipality should be at in order to pay for it itself? Let's look at that. Let's look at construction code. Let's look at things like that. There's some other things. Tax assessment is a whole interesting melange of issues of part-time employees and the effectiveness of our tax assessment system. When we talk about things we've been doing the same way for a long time, we've had various studies over the years, made recommendations, weren't listened to. We don't do enough technology there. We don't do enough to keep properties at market value, which is sort of embedded in the Constitution. We don't do enough things, and as a result, we have some real significant inequities from municipality to municipality across the state. So we want to look at those types of things. And maybe we should look at redevelopment laws. Because, for example, our redevelopment laws are basically based on the way things were in the 1980s. We've made some modifications over time, but the basic thrust of them is that, well, we want to attract people to live in cities, so we've got to give a lot of incentives. Well, today, a lot of people want to live in cities. Incentives same type of incentives that we have today may not be necessary as they were before. So we want to look at things like that. And there's a list of some other things that we think ought to be looked at because things have changed. We think we also want to establish a long-term entity. We used to have a thing called the State Tax Policy Commission. It existed from the 40s into the early 80s. And their job, was a small group of experts, was to look at the state's revenue structure and tax structure on a regular, ongoing basis and make recommendations to the governor and the legislature on changes in the economy and how our tax policies ought to change. We ought to bring that back. We ought to bring back an R&D function in state government, so we've got people who are informed experts, if you will, that are looking at our environment and can make nonpartisan sound policy recommendations to the legislature, right? As opposed to where you have one interest group that says, hey, this is really good for me, and they wind up pressuring the legislature into adopting something. The same thing would happen with the governor's office. I know that doesn't happen very often. But those are some of the things that we've talked about. They're in the plan, and again, it's a framework for how we want to move things forward.
I'm going to add one thing that I caught you on one. You forgot something. You know?
Gloucester County?
Oh, no, Gloucester County is
Okay.
the best county in the
Okay.
state. But besides that, you know, you always hear about, you know, small towns.
Right.
That we should do away with all the small towns. And I'm one of those people that say you don't need small towns. But this group came back and said, you know, small towns are actually very efficient financially. They don't waste money. You might not need the town. My argument is I don't think you really need the small town. But the fact is they're very, very good at managing money. Now, small school districts, it's the other story. Districts with less than 500 kids in it spend 17% more than the highest spending school districts in the state of New Jersey. And we're talking about the Newarks, or some of our urban schools that have a lot of socioeconomic issues. I think like Patterson, they teach in 58 different languages, so it costs a lot to teach there. And our small districts are spending a lot more money than those districts. Because, I mean, that's came out of this, and it's something not to be lost. That's why when we talk about school consolidation, we're not talking about eliminating your school. The school's still going to be there. Your kid's going to still have the same fourth grade history teacher. The only difference is it's not going to be an administration. It'll be a principal. And I'm going to do legislation on articulation. I was just talking to Steve about it. In advance of doing this stuff, we're going to make school districts coordinate curriculum. Now, there's no reason we can't make them do that now. And one other thing, we're going to make them coordinate schedules, because they don't coordinate schedule either. So you can imagine if you have a kid in high school and a kid in elementary school, there's a real possibility that they're off on different days. But there's a lot in this report, and because I want to get to questions, there's a lot in this report that was put into by a lot of people with goodwill, not looking to make friends, but just being honest to have a conversation to start fixing this place. I don't want to listen, New Jersey, in my mind, is the greatest state in the country. It's the most diverse state in the country. It's what makes it so great. But when we have people leaving because they can't afford to stay here anymore, the people that are leaving, the only people who are going to be left behind are the ones that can't afford to leave. And that's going to make it hard. But you want to say something? We'll take questions?
Now, just real quick, then questions. It's interesting because some of the recommendations on there, like you think, wait a minute, it's like common sense. One of the recommendations is that we just have twice a year, a local school board and a local council meet twice a year to talk about shared service. And, you know, and I really have to give kudos to the New Jersey School Board Association. They've done a thing called impediments to regionalization, and we've got to do it intelligently because, you know, we don't want to lose federal money by jamming district factor groups together. But also, we actually had to do legislation a ways back, and I think it was probably the Senate President myself, where you could not have a school district that was not contiguous to a municipality share service. Why? Why not, right? There's things in statute that says you must have a full-time. Well, if you must have a full-time, that means you can't share, right? So there are things that we have to make sure we do through legislation. So just the idea of having people talk twice a year, you think that was common sense? But that's actually one of the recommendations we have, because we find out when people talk, they come up with good ideas.
Thank you for that. Let me say a couple of things and ask a question, and then we'll open up to other people. The report they're describing is online at pathtoprogress.org, so you can,
NJ.org.
okay,
That's progressnj.org.
listen to them. Okay.
Okay.
And one point we only made in passing, I introduced them and them, and the people speaking, is that this is a bipartisan panel, the kind of thing that is supposed to not exist anymore. So, but whatever you think of the recommendations there, and it's not just this one Democrat and one Republican, but the group behind this is people of both parties, which leads sort of to my question. So, Senator Oroho, you mentioned the Grace Commission and President Reagan's role in setting that up. Governor Murphy, as far as I know, had no role in setting this up. So what's the path to implementation, the path to get to this being legislation or becoming state policy?
Well, hopefully, in discussions with the administration, hopefully there will be the idea of discussions with the administration. I know the Senate President has discussions with the administration all the time, but I do expect that there will be legislation coming out. A lot of times, it's interesting thing is in the administration side, you have the regulatory side. And on the legislative side, you have the statutory side. And it's one of the things going down there, realize how much stuff will happen people think about all the laws that will occur, but you also have all the regulations that occur as well. So the administration and the legislature, they absolutely have to talk. Obviously, anything that gets passed has to be signed by the governor. Interesting, when we did the red tape review, it was bicameral, bipartisan. I got to give real kudos out to guys on it, like Senator Van Drew and I were the original on it from the Senate side. Senator Bob Gordon had come on, but Senator John Berzelli with the Lieutenant Governor Kim Guadagno did a great job. He really did. So in the end, no matter what, the administration and the legislature has to come together.
John? And on what Steve just said, we reformed school funding last year after basically a 2-year tour of the state, just pounding away at it. Mm-hmm. And the governor signed a bill that no one thought he would sign, S2. What we're banking on is if we can get more people paying attention and focusing on that New Jersey can be fixed, it is there to be fixed, that this pension healthcare system change we're talking about can save $3 billion, $1 billion to the state, $2 billion to towns and counties. We would mandate, John, that they cut taxes by whatever they save. So if I live in West Effort, between the school district, if they save $7 million in healthcare, they would have to cut their budget by $7 million. If the town saved $1 million, they'd have to cut their budget by $1 million. Doesn't mean they can't raise taxes again. But what we don't want to happen is, like with Chapter 78, when employees start paying into healthcare, the money disappeared. And what we want to show is that you can lower property taxes. This has probably been one opportunity in my lifetime where you'll be able to see a reduction in property taxes and really a process of starting making New Jersey more affordable. Because if we have more money to invest in higher education, it's more attractive for kids to stay here. You know what I mean, John? It all comes down to, I got so much money, and right now it's all going here, which means I'm neglecting everything else, and it makes the state a not attractive place to want to be. And I got to tell you, we got the greatest state in the country. People make fun of New Jersey. It's because they're jealous of us. We got more to offer than anyone.
Okay. Let me open up to questions. Let me say a few things. When I call on you, please identify yourself. Please make your question a question and not a statement. And I'm going to try to mostly call on students first, but first I'll call on the former Assistant Treasurer of the state, Pete McDonough.
Hi. For the benefit of in the idea of knowing your audience, I watched two senators who I respect greatly and have worked with both of them from the first days they were in the Senate. You talked about the pension system. I'm not sure that the audience here understands what the current pension system is, the pension system that I'm in, the PERS system, which is the easiest one. Could one of you two or all three or both of you explain the current pension system and what you're proposing to move to? I think that would get at least the people on that side of the room understanding better.
Well, I just want to, these guys can explain it more in detail, but I can put it to you this way. The teacher's health plan pension plan is going broke in 2027, and the public workers 2029, which means we'll have to raise $8 billion. You understand that, right? $8 billion. That means you're taking the sales tax to 11 or 12%. You know what that hurts? The middle class and the poor. So, thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, Mark's
Okay, so I'll take a crack at explaining the Public Employee Retirement System, that's the PERS system. The state has 7 different plans for groups of employees. The PERS one is one that is generally rank and file state government and local government employees, excluding police and firefighters. So it's your basic, it's everybody who works in a town hall, within state bureaucracy, it covers everybody there. And that program is a defined benefit program. It provides a benefit for employees based on usually their 3 highest, the average of their 3 highest year salary and the number of years that they have served. We've made changes in the system over the last decade. The retirement age has been increased. We have several different levels of benefits of employees based on when they were hired. And as Mr. McDonough did for full disclosure purposes, I have to point out I'm a retired state government employee as well. The other systems are, and that system is divided into 2 pieces administratively. There's a state government piece and a local government piece. The local government piece doesn't have the funding problems that the state side does. The local government piece is in much better fiscal condition because over the years, local governments continued their payments. It wasn't perfect, and there were some times where they were allowed to lapse, but generally they did a much better job of funding their portion for their employees. So the local portion is in better fiscal shape than the state piece, which is the second lowest of our systems as far as its funded ratio. Right? And that's because state government was unable to make its contributions during various times of fiscal stress in the state. Those decisions, we should point out, weren't arbitrary at the time. I mean, there were fiscal problems facing the state, and elected officials at the time thought, well, instead of necessarily raising taxes on people or cutting benefits, we're just not going to make the pension payment. And that's why we're here today. And the other big piece is the teacher's pension system, the Teacher Pension and Annuity Program, TPAF. And that program is the least funded system because it is completely paid for, other than employee contributions. The employer piece is completely paid for by state government, along with Social Security payments as well. And that's something that had been enacted by legislation over the years, and it is a singular challenge that we have today. That good, Pete? Questions?
And the different, for what we're going to right now, similar to what you would hear in a lot of places. And this is for anybody who has less than 5 years or less in the system right now. So anybody with 5 years or over 5 years would not be affected, okay? But anybody who's 5 years or a new employee would go into this hybrid plan where their first $40,000 would be on a defined benefit. All right, it's almost like a Social Security type. But anything above that, any salary above that, the employee and the employer would make contributions into, just like a 401k or a 403b or 457. They would have so, and as I said before, the great thing about defined contributions things are 2 things. 1, the contributions have to be put in, and 2, it's portable assets. That the employee takes those assets with them if they decide to change for another job. Another thing which we actually had done, and Mark made a great point in this, It used to be the pension payment was the last payment made. So if there was a problem, it didn't get paid. We've actually changed that now, and it was, I think, Senator Sweeney and myself who did the bill to make it quarterly payments. So you have to make those payments each quarter. Now, we're not even up to making a full required, by the actuary required contribution. We're at 60% or 70%?
That's 70%.
We're at 70% this year is where we're at. So we still have to get up to, the 100% level, which is in the $7 billion range, all right? So we're not even there quite yet. And that's the problem with, when you go back to that, say that 2001 period, to me, that was a triple storm. Because, does anybody recall, now you guys are probably even younger than, ever recall the tech bubble? You ever read about the tech bubble, right?
Old history.
Valuations. Anybody getting extra credit tonight? Who's getting extra credit? Right? But what occurred was the stock market had both the tech-heavy NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange had gone down significantly in value in March. Okay? The governments weren't putting their money in, so you weren't making any contributions. The stock market already got, and then what happened in June, at the end of June of 2001? That's when the legislature and the administration, which was a Republican administration at the time, agreed to make a 9% retroactive payment for everybody. They weren't making contributions. The stock markets had basically crashed. And you talk about a triple storm. That's one of the big reasons as to why I say before, it's easy to make promises, it's hard to make payments. But so one of the things we've done, currently is that the pension payment can no longer be the last payment made. So if we run into, say, a slowdown or recession, then we're going to have to find other ways also, but not just that the pension would be stopped. But those are the two main distinguish between a defined benefit plan and that defined contribution plan.
Let me do this. I want to call on a couple of people to ask questions and then give you like 2 or 3 questions to pick and choose how you want to answer them. So Jonathan?
First off, I want to thank all 3 of you for coming tonight.
Thank you.
My name is John Kretschmann, and I am an Eagleton undergraduate associate. And I think we all know that the governor's views are very different from your views, and there's a great chance of a veto. So what is your backup plan if there's a veto from this eventual legislation?
Well, first, the governor's views and mine aren't that far apart on a whole host of things. We did $15 minimum wage. We did pay equity. We did women's health care. There's a whole lot of things we actually got done. And just so you know, the governor authored a report in 2005 that is almost word for word what we're talking about with the benefit reform. It's just it's hard when you're in these positions because elected officials don't like to make people angry at them. In fact, elected officials actually want everyone to like you, which means, guess what? That means you're not doing anything. Because, it's impossible to make decisions where the people don't like you. Where you're not going to have people that like you. I'm just going to continue talking to the public because I really believe that the people, if they speak up and they start paying more attention, people's views change. I go back to the old movie Network. Let me ask a question. Property taxes. Is that number 1 here? Is it right? It's been there forever. Well, there was a movie called Network where the anchor gets up, he opens up the window and he screams, "I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore." Well, all I hear is about property taxes since I've been in government. Here's a chance to cut your property taxes. I got to get people to pay attention. Views change when people start speaking up. So I'm going around the state doing these town hall meetings where people are yelling and hollering at us. We had one in Cherry Hill. It was really interesting. When we started talking about the pension enhancements, somebody from the union said, "Oh, no, we didn't ask for that. You did that." Remember? And I'm like, well, wait a minute. What do you mean we did it? You guys pushed like hell for this. Oh, no. Yeah, the legislature just woke up one day and said, we're going to lower your retirement age by 5 years. They woke up one day and said, we're giving 800,000 people a 9% raise. No, they got pushed into it and they did it. They were complicit. At the time, they thought they were doing the right thing, but as Steve said, it was the worst thing. So I'm not that concerned about the governor and I being in different places. We find ways to work things out.
Questions? In the back, Hayden?
First, thanks for being here. My name is Brandon Giovanni. I'm a senior here at Rutgers and a school board member in Middlesex Borough. I was just hoping to get your thoughts on the new proposal to merge the school employees' health benefits plan and the state health benefits plan and the potential for savings there, because, every meeting I have members of the union yelling about Chapter 78, as I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Well,
Let me get to another question. You had your hand up.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Bruce Schoen, I'm past president of the Bergen County School Boards Association, and soon to be vice president of New Jersey School Boards. So my question's on the health benefits plan as well. I come from Bergen County, and as you know, Senator, Bergen has got 77 school districts.
Yeah.
So it's big. My problem is most of those school districts have equal or better too. So how do we get these people on board to change their contracts without them asking for more money to do what you're asking to do?
Is there any more questions?
Is there another question we'll put on the table? Yeah.
Thank you. I would just ask for the students in the room also how you tried to balance generational equity. You spoke about equity between private sector and public sector, but if you could talk a little bit about the really long-term effects for those in the room that will be paying income tax for the next 60, 70 years in the state.
I'll take that one.
You can take health benefits too.
I'll take that one. This is all about that. It's all about government being what it's supposed to be. Government really is supposed to be a safety net. I don't believe government is everything for everyone and they have to do everything for everyone. But for our seniors and our disabled, I got in politics because I have a daughter with Down syndrome. We're not doing our core mission. You know what I'm saying? We're not stepping up and doing our core mission. And we want to make sure that disabled seniors are in a position where we're providing the necessary services for them. And we're also looking not to overtax our young people to a point where they say, I can move to Pennsylvania and pay a lot in taxes right now. And, so it really is, it's a balancing act, but getting it back in, trying to get it back in some kind of a level playing field. Like I was talking to somebody today, we are not providing the services. There's a shortage of mental health services in the state. I can go on and on and on. And all it takes is money. All it takes is money. But the problem is, if all your money is going one place, you can't provide services, and those services get worse. And then the young people here are like, hey, listen, I can go to Pennsylvania, I can go someplace else. I get a cheaper education, an excellent education, and when they leave, then what happens is we've lost our greatest asset, our youth. That's the biggest fear for me. So I don't know if I answered it right, but for me, we're all going to get old at some point, at least I hope. So government having the services in place so that when you get to that point, you can rely on that. I just read a report where people over 70 have increased working. 20% of people over 70 now are continuing to work because they can't afford to retire. So, government has to be there for certain groups, in my opinion.
The issue on the, interesting on the two different state health benefit plans, a couple thoughts. First of all, why we ever had two state health benefit plans in the first place. It's interesting, I always do hear about collective bargaining, which then to me shouldn't be through the legislative process. But we ended up with, for some reason, ended up having two state health benefit plans. And everything I've known about insurance, generally the larger your pools, the more cost effective it is. Interesting, we've had some, discussions with some towns, the idea of them offering the gold plan. When I was down at the League of Municipalities, I was part of a panel, and one of the people had stood up from the crowd and said, Chapter 78, once people understood that there was the idea of a cost sharing. If the costs come down, they come down for everybody, right? So there was a town that had stood up and said, we did go to a gold level plan, and it was negotiated. It was actually negotiated, and when the employees saw that they actually saved money in their contributions, they negotiated and accepted. So it was, and I've heard of another town up by me where they're offering, for example, like the Omnia, care, some of the high deductible kind of plans, where all of a sudden a number of the employees saw that they saved a lot of money in it. So there's a lot of different things that obviously that can occur. But why are we ever allowed to have two separate plans? We tried to get we got it passed for the county colleges, because the county colleges wanted to come out of the school employee benefit planning into the school and into the state health benefit plan. They would have saved $25 million a year, and I know the employees would have probably been about 25% of that. They wanted to. Unfortunately, the legislature passed it. The governor did not agree with it. I think either vetoed or conditionally vetoed it or somehow, but he didn't sign it. But right there, a couple things. If we had one plan, the law of large numbers, you'd probably be a lot more efficient. And if we're going to have a state health benefit plan, why have two?
And I wanted, to your point, and this is really to Steve's point, the Cadillac tax is coming. It's not negotiable anymore.
Right.
You can negotiate if you want to negotiate under a gold plan, but what rhyme or reason? How can you justify adding 40% cost above the gold plan? And the gold plan probably, because the CWA is at 86% actual value on their health care plan that they just put, and that's $27,000. So say it's 23, 24, I'm guessing, but I'm probably not that far off. Gold is going to be where it's at. Because, look, I supported Obamacare. I believe in Obamacare. I think Obama was one of the greatest presidents we ever had. And if he's saying gold is the gold standard, and he's a Democrat, you know what I mean? He's a Democrat. What are we arguing over? We have found, just so you know, and to give credit to the public sector, I did legislation that they supported called a reverse auction on pharmaceutical purchases. Over 3 years, we're saving $1.6 billion. So we are looking for places to save money. We came up with another program called Primary Care Medical Home Centers, which reduces emergency room visits and specialist visits, saves a couple $100 million. We're going to constantly look at areas where we can save money and actually taking our buying power. That's another thing that we really haven't done a good enough job of, capturing all of our buying power and going to these insurance companies and saying, I want a better deal. So, but that all being said, we still have to find ways to reduce cost. And there's too much money to be saved before you start talking about taxes.
It's interesting, as you can tell, we don't necessarily agree on everything.
No, we don't.
No, but the one thing that we certainly agree on is how do we, save money. Interesting enough, when we talked before about school funding, the S2, it's actually a bill that I disagreed with because of how the whole school funding formula came up, and we've had a number of discussions. But as part of this discussion, one of the key things we thought we could get done and made sense to everybody was the extraordinary special ed costs that, quite frankly, we could adjust the school funding for. So, quite frankly, there's a number of things that we have discussions about, all the time. It's interesting that so we don't always agree on everything. I kind of like Ronald Reagan if we come back. No,
but see, extraordinary special ed. It's personally offensive to me when I hear families where people say, we had 3 families move in.
Yeah.
There goes our budget. Because really, as a parent with a child with a disability, my daughter is absolutely entitled to have a full life as she possibly can, to get an education, and really to try to enjoy life to her fullest capacity.
You have no better champion than Senator Sweeney when he is out there for the disabled community. I've been in many discussions, with him, and he really, he's a true champion, and he'll go to the mat on anybody, making sure that occurs.
But John, extraordinary special education would help every single school district in the state. I need $200 million to do it. We agree. We bipartisan agree. I bet you we would get 40 votes in the Senate and 120 in the Assembly to do it. I don't have the money. What a shame. Is the money available? Yes. When you can start investing in the money that you're overspending. So understand something. And by the way, in fairness, was Joe Panaccio, a Republican senator, that brought this issue up.
True.
Because as you can see, we are not, look, we can be partisan, but the only way we're going to get anything done, realize something, the only way anything in this state's going to get done is with Democrats and Republicans working together,
Very true.
or it will not get done. Sorry, John.
No, it's okay. And not only is it one Democrat, one Republican, but one from North Jersey and one from South Jersey, and you're
Yes.
still getting
Yeah.
But we both have the country, just
Yes.
different countries.
I got the mountains, he has the flatlands.
Yes.
one.
Causing all kinds of divides.
Yeah. So we'll call you. Is there somebody else who has what's going? Okay. So you two. And these will be the last questions, I think. So.
My name is Eddie. I'm a junior here at Rutgers. And Senator Sweeney, you mentioned briefly about like cutting municipalities and the costs involved with that. I believe one of the referendum questions coming up in the fall has to do with counties slashing the number of towns by 50%, I think was the figure. So maybe I have the number wrong.
No, there's no referendum.
There's no referendum like that.
Okay. So I don't know what I read then, but would it not be wise would you think it would not be wise for counties to cut the number of towns in relation to cost?
Well, every one of us comes at it differently. Like I'll tell you, because it took me forever to get Mark to agree that my home county, Gloucester, is amazing, and my leadership was exceptional.
It's
And
amazing
I'm
how
putting
good a
words.
job
I'm
he's
putting
done.
words in his mouth because I know he wants to say that. But when I left county government in 2010, we were saving $30 million a year. My home county eliminated all their jails. We don't have a female jail, a male jail, a juvenile jail. We were spending $28 million, and we're now spending $13 million. Again, I moved off of the, get rid of again, because of this report, get rid of the small towns. It's more focused on let's fix the school piece, which is the heaviest burden on the taxpayers. But what I found out is, small towns are very efficient. It's just getting those towns to continue to work together. I did the 2% property tax cap. It was my legislation. Chris Christie, I like to remind everybody, was at 2.5. And I tell everybody I regret that I didn't make it 0, because property taxes are high enough, and it would have forced shared services more. You know what I mean, Mark? You see more shared services because it's harder for towns to get underneath the cap. And so you're basically forcing the sharing of services.
So I'm going to chime in here because, one, the report that Senator refers to says size may not be the issue, was something that I did with Dr. Caprio at Bloustein a couple years ago. If you want it, you can find it online. Do a search for Bloustein local size study. You can probably find it that way. But it did say that, and the evidence was that smaller municipalities spend less per capita. There's a number of reasons why. There was no outrageous, statistically significant indicator as to what it was, but one of the biggest indicators why that was that towns with more property value, a higher percentage of property value than others, they tended to spend more money because they could. And I'm not going to, we've been here for a while, I can talk to anybody later about the other issues. But the reality is that bigger is not necessarily cheaper. What I think the senator talks about is that you need, in some cases, you need incentives to get municipalities to control their costs, right? And that one of the things that has done a very effective job of that was the caps the levy caps that were started under Governor Corzine in 2007 and amplified in 2010 by Governor Christie and the Democratic legislature. Those really created some pressures. Senator Sweeney argued not enough pressure, but it got us on the road to the point that our property tax increases on a year-to-year basis now are the lowest they've effectively ever been. I could go into a whole diatribe about other state policies, about other revenue sources that the state has effectively stolen from municipalities and doesn't want to give back, that there's some policy changes that we ought to be looking at, and I hope over time we'll be able to look at some of those things because we haven't been terribly smart about that. I'll also do one parenthetical about what from Bergen County gentleman talked about, is that we have to remember, and we showed this in Chapter 78, the legislature creates the laws about how collective bargaining works, right? And in 2011, with Chapter 78, they said, okay, starting now, all public employees are going to be contributing to their health care. It started at state government under Governor Corzine, where we started paying 1.5%. We amped it up in 2010, I guess, with everybody paying 1.5% once their contracts expired. And then we did Chapter 78. The legislature imposed that. There's an effort for the legislature to repeal that, right? That's its own battle right now. But I think we have to remember, if the political parties and the administration and the legislature can come together and recognize, yes, this is a big problem to solve, and say, let's get our heads together and figure out what we can all agree on, then we can get some progress on these issues.
Let's get two more questions. There are hands up and quick questions and quick answers, because I know some of you have to leave. So go ahead. The microphone's coming.
I got one. Okay.
Gina Marie Santor, undergraduate, associate class of 93. Mark, quick point of order. Public employees are state taxpayers.
Yes.
If you would clarify that in your comments moving forward.
Yes,
sure.
without question, but we're looking for balance.
Yes. Senator Sweeney, in regards to the hybrid plan with a defined benefit for the first 40K and then moving into 401K, I have been to several of the public hearings. Thank you for taking the roadshow. I am really unclear why the unions are pushing back so much, because past precedent shows that unions have sold out the unborn, so to speak. I'm really kind of surprised by it, and I do want our pensions to actually be solvent. So could you speak to that?
Let me get Frank. Frank, you had your hand up?
Thank you.
No, I guess. Frank Popper?
Do you have a question?
No, okay. Make that the last question.
Okay.
Oh, okay, we'll make you the last question.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Mario. I'm from Union County. I was just going to ask, is there a state in America that you would consider to be like a role model for good government?
Good question.
That's actually
It's kind of
not New
long-winded.
Jersey.
I'll throw an answer out to that real quick, is that every state is significantly different from the others, and I have a real philosophical challenge with a lot of the rankings we see. We see a lot of rankings because we've got some good academicians who can do statistics and figure stuff out. But the reality is a lot of those rankings don't make any sense because they don't deal with what you have in the boots on the ground. New Jersey has its own particular problems because we're an old state. We're the most densely populated state in the country by more than 20%, by number 2. Right? We have the oldest infrastructure in the country. All of those things lead to a lot of expenses. And we have a public that seems to demand a high level of public service. People want what they want. And that's one of our inherent challenges in how we try to solve these problems.
And Jeannie, I'm glad you brought that up. Public employees are taxpayers, and they should be recognized that they're in it with us. Problem is 30% of them are leaving the state when they retire, and the reason they leave is because they say it's too expensive to live in.
You helped us with our taxable pension going up to
Yeah.
$100,000. Most
Yeah.
of us will never make $100,000 in pension.
You're right.
Thank you for that.
But the point is, we're all in this together. It's a hell of a lot better than leave us alone. We need to fix it together. And I don't think it's selling anyone out. Again, with my union, we meet 4 times a year. I'm the chair of 2 pension funds. Money managers come in, we look at the numbers. Well, the numbers didn't work out. What are we going to do? Are you going to increase your contribution? Are you going to change your benefit? But you do it because you have to do it. One of the things that surprised me was when I first got here is the lack of real understanding the way pensions work with the public sector. When people say, well, I paid what I negotiated, I'm sorry, if your assumption rate doesn't work out, then your investment didn't work out, then you're falling behind. So in 2000 to 2010, our assumption rate was 8.25, 8.5. But because of 2001 and 2008, when the recessions hit, our average over that decade was 2%. So every single year, we're short 6.25% or 6.5%. That builds, and that just builds. And next thing is, so taking the position that I'm paying what I was told to pay, that's not how it really works. Every year, you're supposed to be looking at the pensions and how they're managed, and if your returns work, well, you had a good year. If they don't work, then you have to make changes. And what's happened here is, changes have to happen. What really is frustrating as hell to me, though, is Pennsylvania, a progressive Democrat governor, signed pension reform that the Republican legislature gave him. And the unions said they knew they had to do something. What I'm saying is, in New Jersey, you need to do something. I talk to people all the time, they say, well, we got to sit at the table and figure out how. These aren't really hard solutions to figure out. In fact, there's very few. But we're fighting for people's pensions. Like, not one person that's vested is going to see a change in their pension. But if we don't change, in 2027 hits, they're going to see their pensions reduced probably by a third. I mean, that'll probably be the least amount. You're going to have to raise taxes $8 billion. And people are going to say, how'd that happen? Well, sometimes it's not fun saying, hey, get in front of this. We got to get in front of this. 2005, the fix was this big. The unions told me, just leave us alone. It was this big. Well, we ignored it, and now you have what we have. And I feel bad for the people. I feel bad for taxpayers, feel bad for workers. But to continue this road where we're just going to let this implode on us, it's not responsible as leaders. The reason why I respect Steve so much is he's a leader in the legislature. That's a Democrat saying the guy's a leader because he's willing to take tough stands. We need more leaders. We need more people that are willing to stand up and say, hey, listen, we got to do what's best for everyone. And if we don't, I don't want people coming up to me in 2027 saying, wow, you were right. It won't be a good feeling. Thanks, John.
Well, there's a literature table out there with a path, a brochure that has the correct websites for to get a copy of the full report. And Senator Oroho, Senator Sweeney, Mark, thank you all very much.
Thank you all for coming.